Please give it up for Josh Geiger and Juan Schlosser.
Hey. Hey, it's an honor to be here. It's an honor to be speaking here at Nuanu. This is our second year, my family and I, my wife and my lovely 5 children. And yeah, it's just we have the great honor and pleasure to be able to present and speak about philosophy and science that we apply to our work and that we live in our own lives every day. So here we are, we're ready to go. Okay, so the name of our talk is simply Fractal Architecture. And so I start this talk with a question. What is a fractal? A fractal is something that is self-similar at all scales, meaning however far you zoom in or however far you zoom out, you find the same fundamental pattern, the same fundamental geometry. A great example of this is a cabbage or a head of lettuce, where you have the smaller leaf perfectly embedded in the larger leaf, all the way to the smallest scale, and it resembles the largest leaf. And so in this talk, I want to hopefully impart to you about why it's so important for us to design our own lives, our own structures, our own agriculture, our own foundational and infrastructure type systems as a fractal to nature, to the greater cosmos. So the first part of the talk is going to be called Introduction to Universal Energetics. We live in a universe. We live in an ocean of electrical charge. Sometimes this charge is more dense, sometimes it's more rare, spiraling clockwise, spiraling counterclockwise. And this charge tends to organize and concentrate into certain patterns, certain geometries, certain spiralic forms. We see it evident in the spiral arms of the galaxy. We see it in the formation of flowers and plants. We see it in cyclones and hurricanes. And we see it in a number of natural life forms on the planet. We see it in the ratios of our knuckles in our hands to our arms to our larger bones in our arms, our legs, the spirals of our ears, the branchings of our blood vessels. We see it all throughout the body. And there's an important reason for this. Here's this just talking a little more. We find this sacred proportion in branching angle and progressive branch diameter in plants, trees, like I said, rivers, in the blood vessels in the body, the nervous system. And this sacred proportion is golden mean, also known as phi ratio. And you can see this ratio is 1 to 1.618. And this rose is a great example of that. You have the larger petal, the smaller petal nestling perfectly into the larger, and so on and so on and so on, and becoming progressively smaller at golden mean integers. So, what happens when charge curves in a golden mean spiral? So we have all this charge all over the universe, and whenever it hits this golden mean spiral, something remarkable happens. As it hits this spiral and proceeds towards center, the charge actually accelerates towards center. This is very important. You can imagine the arms of the spiral getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and there's an actual net increase in acceleration as it goes towards center. And if you imagine multiple axes of spin, you can see one spin here, one spin here, one spin here, one spin, and then the opposite direction. You have all these axes of charge coming in simultaneously and gaining acceleration as the spiral arms get smaller and tighter towards an implosion point. It's the smallest point in the universe. It's called Planck. And at that implosion point, all the energy that went into this system spins back out. And the vortex, the vacuum created by the vortex of implosion, sucks that energy back in and around. and circulates this energy. And so we start to get a self-organization of charge, a self-organization of this energy. It becomes perpetual. And what does this geometry look like? It's a torus. It represents self-organization of charge. And we see this torus at all scales in the natural world. Spiraling in, expanding, contracting. We see it at the atomic level. We see it in the electrical field around cells. We see it in organ systems like the heart and the brain. And we see it in our body. There's actually a weak electric field around the body that resembles a torus in the human body. We see it in planetary bodies, solar bodies, stars, solar systems, spiral galaxies, this sort of thing. This is another example of a fractal. And this torus is a fundamental geometry in all of nature. And so, if you can imagine what a healthy ecosystem looks like, a healthy ecosystem would be abundant in charge, abundant in energy. And how does an ecosystem become abundant in charge and energy? Well, all the cells that make up all the plants, that make up these root networks that are interacting with the mycelium and everything, are made up of trillions and trillions of tiny little electrical fields called tori. And so collectively, all these trillions of cells, these toric cells, make a plant that has a larger toric body that all these little tori fit perfectly into, like a fractal. And then you can see that the same thing's happening in the trees and the animals and everything. And so collectively, as a forest, the forest even has a toric field, a very large-scale toric field. And so this is the epitome of health, of charge capacitance, the ability for charge to really concentrate and resonate and become perpetual. And this is even a really great picture because you have the waterfall in there churning the water, releasing negative ions that is being absorbed into and circulated through the electrical fields, the tissues, everything of the plants and the animals around it. So, this is our goal. This is how we want to design our structures, our spaces, our economics, our social structure, our agriculture, everything. We want to see if we can mimic and work towards just as healthy, and we want to distribute our resources perfectly. We want to be efficient as possible in all of this. And why? Because we too are electric beings. This is an actual photo of Kirlian photography of the electric field around somebody's hands. But this is a measurable field around the human body. And humans require sufficient charge in their cells and their organ systems and their whole bodies in order to have health. And whenever a person becomes depleted in charge, an organ system perhaps becomes depleted, we experience disease. So, in order to thrive, we want to be in charge abundant spaces. Just imagine what feels better, walking into a forest or a hospital. There's a very physical, a very electric aspect to that. So what is the problem we face today? Our current civilization is built with non-natural geometry, synthetic materials, and extractive explosive technologies. Petroleum, gas, all these things are boom to turn generators and turbines. They explode, create heat, are extremely inefficient. Our building, agricultural, healing, and even economic practices are extractive and are ultimately non-sustainable. Extractive, that is a key word. We live in toxic cities, inside toxic homes and damaged ecosystems, eating depleted foods, surrounded by Wi-Fi and electrosmog. All these things tax our electric field around our body, also known as an aura. This creates a charge-depleted environment, and this is detrimental for electrical beings such as ourselves. Depletion of charge in our bodies and organ systems results in disease. So this is the problem. Here's an example of very common conventional construction practices. Melted steel beams in straight lines with right angles. Nothing natural about this. You don't see anything like this in nature, and you can go into a space like that and we'll find that the charge capacitance is measurably lower than that of a forest. And we build thousands and thousands of buildings and put them all in one spot and then have people work and live by the millions all over the planet. It's called cities. And people's health and well-being truly suffers from this type of lifestyle. So disconnected from nature, so disconnected from the natural flow. But of course, with every problem, there's a solution. There are many solutions. That's probably what brings us all together here today, is because we're oriented towards solutions. We're oriented towards unity. For every extractive technology we depend on, there is a regenerative alternative. There's a regenerative agroforestry and cropping system for food production. There are free energy implosive solutions already developed yet unreleased due to big corporate and elitist interests. There is biologic design for healthy buildings, which is what Juan and I want to talk about today, or are going to talk about. And there are more holistic economic and social systems that distribute resources more efficiently. Regenerative technology is based in the natural geometry we find in nature, phi, or golden mean. And so, yeah, these key words, extractive versus regenerative. For every extractive, degenerative technology and infrastructure we have on the planet, there is a regenerative solution. Phi geometry is the key to regenerative implosive technology. Implosion is the other force from explosion. It's highly efficient. It's very amazing. It's a very fun science to get into. We have a very short amount of time to paint a very, as crisp a picture as we can without going into all the how and all that. So here's just a handful of working phi technologies. Energetic plasma healing devices, geomancy methods, bioarchitecture, water vortexing systems, and I'll go into detail on a couple of these. Therify. This is developed by one of Juan and my mentors, longtime mentor. We call him Uncle Dan, just one of the sweetest, most genius men on the planet. And Therify is, I don't know, has anybody ever seen this picture before? This is an Egyptian hieroglyph. Look kind of familiar. And the way that this works is electrical charge at high voltages put through an inert gas that creates this plasma. That's the definition of plasma, and is built with phi geometries. Creates two vortexes that meet in the middle, causing phase conjugation, and creates a regenerative field. And they've found this is successful in 23 countries. It has countless testimonials. Of course, they can't make these kind of claims, heals this, heals that. But they have countless testimonials about massive pain reduction and even great success in healing some of the most challenging diseases on the planet. Here's a picture of blood cells before a treatment. You see they're very clumped, stuck together. And then after, organized, freely moving. And this is a very repeatable phenomena. Here's another one. This is called Sri Yantra in the desert. This is what I was saying when I referred to geomancy. Geomancy translates to earth magic, but here we're just going to talk about how one can influence the energetic patterns on the actual land with different methods. This is the work of Bill Witherspoon, Sri Yantra in the desert. He inscribed large Sri Yantra into arid desert land, and he filled them with quartzite piezoelectric sand. Piezoelectric is defined as something that when you put pressure on it, it releases a electrical field. So quartz, like a quartz crystal, if you push on your quartz, there's a electric field that's released from that. The largest project was a half-kilometer wide, documented dramatic increase in rainfall, conditioning of soil to inhabit wider plant life, reduced alkalinity, less compact, higher microbial counts. So increased organic matter, all these things in a matter of months. And he repeated this on multiple sites with similar results. And so you can kind of see, this is one of the problems with some of these old guys is they do these incredible works, but then they take terrible photos. So Bill Witherspoon, they took this from an aerial photo. It's very low resolution, but you can see the Sri Lanka over here, half-kilometer wide. And this is in a dried lake bed in Oregon, and multiple corroborated reports tell us that the annual increase in this specific area dramatically increased, as well as a change in the soil microbial count and vegetative growth, etc. This is when it was first done. And bioarchitecture. So this is what me and Juan are super passionate about. This is the angle we're coming at it with in developing technology to make us and people more healthy, and also to integrate with the ecology, because that's part of it. That's key. And in brief, this is use of specific materials, site placement, and geometry to increase charge capacitance of the structure. That's the ability for the structure to hold and resonate charge. Creating spaces that are similar to a forest in terms of charge concentration. Measurable and repeatable. Verifiably biologically beneficial based upon multiple trials with improved seed germination, where seeds germinate more efficiently in biologically designed structures than outside. Electric beings are more healthy when in charge-rich environments. Here is a straw bale home I built in California. This type of biologic design is not so emphasizing the specific geometry, but more so the materials. It's made with stone foundation, exterior clay plaster, lime plaster, earthen floor, and this type of structure feels amazing to walk into and to be in. And then this is the current project that Juan and I are working on. This is the brilliant design by Juan himself. We currently have built 2 of these domes. One of them is even better than the first one, and they're right over here. They're right behind us. They're both amazing. The first one took a little bit more of a learning, how the heck do we do this? But we've figured out how to put it together, and it's amazing. So here's the framing. You can see it's made of bamboo, bioresin, some long drafts to hold it all together. These golden mean geometries, these are golden mean path curves. You see this? Multiple opposing golden mean path curves. And then here's a finished one with the panels on top. It's a temporary top window until we get the official one done. Keep the rain out for now. And without further ado, Juan is going to go into more detail about biologic architecture. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody here. Our lectures actually are very complementary, and I'm just going to try to develop a little further on the science of biological architecture and fractal design. So let's get right into it, because we have lots of slides and not a lot of time. So these are what I call some bioarchitecture energetic basic principles. There is actually a lot of things that we could talk about in relationship to bioenergetics, but this lecture is going to be like the very essential principles. And Josh was talking about Dan Winter as one of the fathers of bioarchitecture, so we think that Professor Philip Callahan is actually probably the grandfather of it, and he was an electrical engineer. He was also studying insects and antennae and the way subtle energy will transmit throughout nature in between plants and animals and insects. He was also researching ancient architecture and pyramid structures. So he did something that is very interesting to describe what actually happening in a structure when you think about health and how architecture could influence human health. So what he did basically is he was studying the field effect of trees. So he was looking at trees, and he will take, because he was a radio engineer, he was able to understand how to spectrum analyze very, very weak signals. So he took his antenna, put it into a tree, and then he spectrum analyzed the subtle electrical field that is emanating from the tree. And he basically found that there was a series of frequencies that you could find in the electric field of the tree. And he figured that these frequencies were actually what is called the Schumann harmonic cascade, which is commonly known as the Earth frequency. So it's a primary frequency, 7.8 hertz, but also a number of series of harmonics. So he realized that you could actually diagnose the health of a tree by understanding how efficiently that dielectric antenna, fractal antenna, meaning the tree, was able to actually capture this Schumann harmonic cascade. So by doing that, he understood the electrical nature and energetic nature of all living things. Moreover, he had the intuition that this maybe might play also a role in certain types of architecture, and why certain people will maybe live very healthy lives when they were staying or living in these structures. So he went to a village in England where it was known that people were living very long periods of time, potentially over 100 years. And then he did the exact same thing he did with the tree. He took there his spectrum analyzer and analyzed the subtle energy field coming from, in this case, not the tree, but the building. And he realized that the Schumann harmonic cascade was also very present in that structure. So he concluded, or he thought, that this probably will have been a very influential factor of why people in these buildings were living so long and have such a healthy lives. This is another thing that he studied, which were a series of towers that are in Ireland. And these towers were used by monks, and they were meditated there. But they also had like an agricultural function. So they were used to actually increase yield. Everything around these towers will actually grow much better, and there will be like this increased biomass, like the same example of the city jantra that Josh was just talking about. And then he was studying these structures, and you see this kind of corrugated section. So these are like, it's like a waveguide, and it will have like a specific frequency. So according to him, these particular towers, they were not necessarily designed for the Schumann harmonics, but they were capturing radio waves that will come from the cosmos. So the way this antenna will be tuned will be by filling up the bottom with sand. So you essentially will change the frequency of the dielectric antenna, and then will hit resonance. The monks will actually sense this intuitively, and they will know that this dielectric antenna was actually in tune, and it will be actually to perform as an energetic device that will create this living energy that will emanate and flow throughout the landscape. So I would like to go deeper into this idea of Philip Callahan and explain a few things about how this take place and a few details of how this science really works. So again, the Schumann frequency is actually formed by a cavity that exists in between the ionosphere and the surface of the planet. So that has a wavelength. That wavelength is 7.8 hertz, and then it creates a whole series of different harmonics. And those harmonics also have a golden relationship. So why the Schumann frequency is so important for living things? So one of the reasons is because throughout the evolution of biology, we've always been bathing in these frequencies. So our body is designed to be in these electrical environments. And these are natural environments. In forests, we are bathing on the Schumann frequency. If you actually if you are in a forest, there is a huge amount of these subtle electrical frequencies. So this is one clue. When astronauts go to space, when they fly out of the surface of the Earth, in the beginning they were actually getting they were getting sick. They would suffer a whole bunch of different health issues just because of the fact that they were separated from the surface of the planet. So the scientists, they figured out that you could carry with you something called the Schumann frequency generator. And a Schumann frequency generator is just an electronic device that produces the Schumann frequency artificially, and that they will solve this problem. So this tells us why and how it is so important for us to be in the presence of this subtle energy. Another clue that we can find is the experiments of Lou Montagnier. So this is down here. His experiments are amazing, and you can conclude so many things out of what he does, because DNA was spontaneously generated out of information that was carried by water. But one of the fundamental keys for the experiment to actually work was the Schumann frequency. So there is something about DNA replication which is driven by the Schumann frequency. We can then understand that these frequencies are so important for us. So in order to understand how a building is able to harness these Schumann harmonics, we can see the atmosphere and the surface of the Earth like a capacitor. It's basically a spherical capacitor. So capacitance exists in between any electrical potential, and that's the atmosphere and the surface of the Earth. So any dielectric material that we place on the surface of the Earth eventually will behave in the same exact way that a capacitor will behave in all our electronics. So, a tree, forest, an entire ecosystem will be a living capacitor. A building will also be a capacitor in the exact same sense. So materials. Why materials are so important in the context of the Schumann harmonics? Sorry, is because only certain types of materials can actually be capacitive. Normally, natural materials, which are produced by nature herself, have these capacitive properties. This is why they are capacitive, because they are designed as well to harness these frequencies. So there is certain property of dielectric materials, and this is getting a little bit technical, but is what is called dielectric constant. So the dielectric constant is the property of a material to store dielectric flux. So the greater the ability of a material to store a dielectric flux is the greater the dielectric constant of this material. So again, natural materials versus unnatural materials. So natural materials will always have a very high dielectric constant versus something artificial, synthetic, made in a natural artificial process, will always create a type of a structure that it could be dielectric, but because of its inner coherent structure, wouldn't be able to store capacitance very efficiently, and therefore will not be an optimal material to actually build your house with. So another factor that will influence the ability of a building to amplify and store this dielectric charge will also be the shape. So for example, trees are fractal antennas, dielectric antennas. And then so any design that operates and works with this kind of fractal design will mimic energetically what trees are doing in nature, and therefore will be able to resonate, amplify, and create an ambient charge field that will be highly beneficial for life and longevity and well-being, etc., etc. So there is another interesting concept of what so-called dielectric resonators. So in electronics, there is this little ceramic electronic components that are able to reflect dielectric charge, and in the same way that you know, in a room or in a dome, acoustic energy will be able to resonate and be amplified. In dielectric resonators, dielectric energy can be resonated and amplified as well. So when we use certain shapes, we are capable of, in architectural design, we are capable to amplify these subtle energetic fields. And we can see these being used highly throughout the ancient world. This is actually a picture I took in Egypt, and this is the Holy of Holies, which is right here. So you can see the fractal design here, like you have the outdoor, and then there's the same shape, and again the same shape and multiple shapes all around it. So these will the apex and the critical mass of charge will build up in that exact point. If you actually notice, this temple have the geometry of the human body. So it mimics the human body as it's the most sacred of all. So that's why they mimic the human anatomy. And this is done throughout Egypt in so many ways and so many forms. We don't have enough time to talk about this in this lecture, but it was the design principle that the ancients were using everywhere in so many different design temple designs throughout the ancient world. Measurements. I'm talking about all of these. Are we able to actually do this today? Can we replicate this work from Callahan, and are we able to do this? So yes, it is absolutely possible. We actually collaborated with Dan Winter in developing a software. We actually feed him with data, measuring spaces in order for him to fine-tune. So we did the beta testing of the app. And this app essentially uses EEG headset, which also measures the weak electrical field of the brain. And then by using this hardware, which is called the Muse, it's connected to an iPad. And there's an app that can be used for measuring brain waves, but it can be also be used for measuring the subtle electrical field of spaces. So it's called sacred space. And so we created this document. It's like 80 pages of measuring all these different environments. I took personally so many of these measurements just to actually understand this principle. I really experienced it. The fascinating thing, we went to this place. This is one of our projects in Shambhala Islands. It's called the Widi Islands. This place is so remote. There's 104 islands there in the middle of the ocean. There's no electricity whatsoever. So it's the most pristine environment to be able to take this environment. I gotta say, when you try to measure a tree in a normal environment, there's so much electromagnetic pollution that it's really difficult to actually get any clear measurements of what's really happening. But here you can see very clearly, this is the spectrum analysis of the tree. So this is the amplitude, and this is the frequency. So these are the Schumann harmonics, all these lines. And there is no electricity on this place. So it is clearly the Schumann frequency in the tree. So this is some of our designs, structures that we already built, and then we were actually using these buildings to, to perform these experiments and really prove this concept. So here is one of the structures. We're actually doing a comparative study, so we're measuring normal structures, concrete buildings versus biologically designed bioarchitecture structures. So we were not just using spectrum analysis, we're also using A device called the GDB, gas discharge visualizations, developed by Dr. Korskov. And he has a device that takes these graphs and basically gives you the energy of the environment. So this is sort of like the control group or the bottom line of the research. That's the house. This is biogeometry. I don't want to go too much into that, but there's another way of measuring solar energy in spaces. And this is seed germination, and this is the spectrum analysis. So I'm just going to go through it quickly because we have a lot of slides. This is one of our concept designs. So this is also another concrete building. You can see how similar the structure is. The seed germination is also very, very similar. And then here we go to one of our spaces. You can see the difference of energy is already quite substantial, and also the seed germination. The spectrum analysis, yeah, you have some more Schumann harmonics. Isn't very clear again because of the immense electromagnetic pollution that is actually everywhere. More of our design work, and this was the top of the line. Like, you can see the amount of energy here is like maybe 100 times greater than a conventional concrete building. And the seed germination was like, the root system is developed exponentially in comparison with the other tests. You can see these graphs and the difference, and this is the structure that we're talking about. And also the Schumann harmonics is more present here. Here you can see, actually, there is a meter here, so you can really see the difference of seeds germination on the bottom versus the top. So let's keep going. Bioelectricity, I love to talk about Jerry Tenen because as Josh was also talking about it, like how does this affect us? Like, why is it that it is so important for your biology and for your cells, apart from what we have seen, to be in environments where charge is present? So Jerry Tenen understood that the healthy electrical voltage of the cell is minus 25 to minus 30 millivolts. So when you are sick, that voltage will, two things, or will increase because your body is trying to heal, and that's what creates pain, is that electrical charge that is increasing, so your body is trying to regenerate, or it will decrease to a point where it might actually flip polarity. It goes from minus to positive, and that's his electrical theory of cancer. So cancer, he called it the switch on and off cancer pathology. That's what cancer, according to Jerry Tenen, actually is a flip of polarity. So if you can restore the electrical voltage in your cells or in that particular part of your biology, your organs, you can very easily heal cancer, and he actually have done this. And then we have another group, which I also researched quite deeply. It's called the BX protocol, and they have basically confirmed the exact idea of Jerry Tenen. All the root cause of all diseases is mitochondrial dysfunction, meaning the inability of your cells to produce energy. If you don't have energy, you can suffer any disease, and we can call it a cancer, we can call it anything. The medical industry has created all these silos. It's like there is this thing or this thing, and then there is this pill that you can take for healing this thing. But if you correct the electrical voltage and the ability of your mitochondria to produce energy, you can experience benefits and healing effects on anything that you have. Because healing is holistic. You're going to address the entire thing, and the root cause of that is energy production, if your cells are actually able to produce that electrical charge. So environments play a role in that. Food play a role, and lots of other factors can influence, but environments can be a very important aspect. And one thing that is very important on that respect is geomancy. Geomancy is, as Jose is divining the earth, understanding essentially what is the energetic landscape of our environment. but the one that is essentially created by the Earth herself, like the natural currents of energy that flow through the landscape. And there are many causes for these energetic flows, but one of the most important is actually underwater veins. So there is a river, an underwater river that flows through inside the Earth, and then there will be a mirror energetic current that will surface throughout the surface of the Earth, and then that current is called geopathic stress. So in geopathic stress, you don't wanna place your bed. You don't wanna do certain things in these places where geopathic stress exists. And in this documentary, it's called Geopathic Stress documentary. So here we have this guy is a dowser, and this guy is a scientist. He uses rods, and he's using a magnetometer. So he just walks around and finds these rivers of magnetism that flow through the landscape. And then so in BioArc, for example, we do this analysis. We do what we call bioenergetic surveys. And we map these lines. And when we build our structures, we take them into account in order to make sure that we are not exposed to this geopathic stress. So coming back to what we were talking about, the voltage of the cells, we know that electrical fields and magnetic fields are inversely proportional. So if you have a magnetic ribbon flowing through your body, the electrical voltage of the cells that are in that part of the body will diminish. And again, that's the root cause of so many diseases. So this is why geomancy is important. You have this other example, Ken Willen. If you have a cathode ray tube like the old TVs and you stick a magnet, what do you have? You have a dark shadow where electrical energy cannot manifest. So that's the equivalent of geopathic stress in your body. So here is another example. In this documentary, they talk about this lady, this woman who lived in a house where geopathic stress was almost absent because of the design of the house, and this woman was living over 100 years. So coming back around, this is all steel. This is the modern way that we figure that we build most of our structures in our time. And we don't see this because it's invisible, it's in the columns and the floor and everything, but this is all steel. So when you're in a modern building and you're separated from the ground, first of all, you will be insulated from the Schumann harmonic cascade because you are disconnected from the earth. Second, you have so much steel around you and so much magnetic fields that this is equivalent to what in geomancy they call geopathic stress. But now it's created by the building you live in. And if there is any electromagnetic pollution, Wi-Fi, cables going around, electronics, you have the equivalent of a very dangerous geopathic stress zone. But it's created by the building itself. So it isn't really a place where people are going to experience a healthy and long life. Another clue here about geopathic stress and energy and is what we call atmospheric electricity. So interestingly, the driver of lots of these electrical phenomena, including the Schumann harmonics, is actually water, like rain, electrical storms. So this experiment, which is called the Kelvin generator, is essentially, and this is a little technical, but there is two water jets. They're very small, just one water jet here and one water jet here. This is coils that are actually connected electrically in between each other. And then this coil and this coil are connected to these two spherical capacitors so that those two little water streams are actually creating 10,000 volts of energy. This is what's created by the atmosphere, But this is also what's created by the underwater streams of water that flow underneath the surface of the Earth. So when those electrons flow, they create a magnetic current that we call geopathic stress. This is key to understand, and this is the work of Schlosser. He did lots of experiments with Kelvin generators. And it's key to understand bioenergy, or how energy is created by natural systems, essentially. And another interesting experiment that we can use to understand how a building is able to act as a capacitor that tapped into these frequencies is the corona motor or electrostatic motor. So an electrostatic motor is something, is a motor that is designed in such a way that will work with electrostatic current. So you take a drone and you send this antenna with one single spike or multiple spikes, and then this antenna will be connected to the motor and then connected to the Earth, grounded to the Earth. So the higher this antenna is into the atmosphere, the greater the electrical potential. So when you look at cathedrals, why they were trying to go so high and why were they creating such a monumental structures is because they wanted to increase the dielectric potential in between the ionosphere and the surface of the planet. Further, if you increase the number of points and you create a very complex antenna, you can also increase the electric potential because you are able to capture more electrostatic charge. If now you start to stick dielectric shape resonators and multiple layers of geometric patterns that are able to amplify and harmonize this energy, then you begin to create a much more complex form of energy that was what was used throughout the whole ancient world to create what we call sacred space. So this is an example. I found this in internet and I just found it was fascinating. So this is a temple in Cambodia, and you can really see here the action of a temple as a capacitor, accumulating that electrostatic charge, and then at some point it becomes so saturated, and this is interesting, this is the sunset. This is what they call the Agnihotra moment, which is a moment in which the currents of the Earth, in the interaction between the sun and the Earth, those currents basically augment. So if there is a magnetic line or any form of energy that you will have like a crescendo, a peak of energy that will increase in that particular moment. So in that particular moment, this building, this temple, is so well designed that will essentially the capacitor will saturate and it will begin to discharge its excess capacitance. And it's exactly what happens with the Tesla coil. This is, if you could say, this is an organic Tesla coil. It works with atmospheric electricity. This is created by a bunch of electronics, so it's a synthetic kind of concept. This is an organic form of energy that is way more complex and rich in many ways than just simply what we use as electricity. And again, this is one of our designs. Some examples of ancient temples, fractal design, like, I mean, the Great Pyramid was an amazing exemplar, and it is a complex, it's not really a complex geometry, but it's highly tuned in certain ratios and proportions, including the golden ratio, the square root of golden ratio as well. And inside of the King's Chamber, actually, there is a sort of pagoda. It's almost like 20 meters high or something, and there is all these layers. So you have a complex dielectric antenna as well that mimics some sort of like logarithmic properties as well. But you can see the evolution of, well, this is also very interesting. This is, the first time I saw this many years ago was on the book of Dan Davison on his Shape Power book, and he talks about this experiment with a friend of his stick a Tesla coil inside of a pyramid, and then they did this long time exposure of this thing, and then you have this sort of like torsional electrical field that develops inside of the pyramid. So the pyramid is a projector of energy, and this is what we can kind of see here. But yeah, moreover, you can see like kind of sort of the evolution of temple design throughout the ancient world, like how they were using a pyramid, but in this case it's slightly more like a dome, a pyramid hybrid, something in between. And then there is these extensions that come out, which are a fractal of the central part. So there is these self-resonant properties that the different members of the structure are actually sort of like resonating and oscillating in between one another. So in my opinion, it's a more sophisticated, in a way, fractal dielectric antenna. And you have these phenomenal structures like Angkor Wat that were like a living example of this kind of principles. This is one of our designs. This is the, we use some metal here because this is the anode. The anode means the positive electrode of the building, and many ancient buildings were doing this as well. And again, going back around with the concept of fractal dielectric antennas in the natural world. Trees are a perfect example of this concept, and they are actually very similar to what you might have heard of the work of Wilhelm Reich on organ accumulators. So it's sort of like a multi-layer fractal, fractal capacitor, or logarithmic capacitor, if you will, that that converge towards the center. So this is the same thing that happening in between the different layers of the rings of a tree. So you have this alternation of capacitive and more conductive layers moving towards the center. And there is also, this is an asymmetrical capacitor. Both sides of the capacitor, the two electrodes, are not the same size. They become smaller and smaller. And in electronic engineering, you will say that basically that creates a greater difference of potential. Therefore, you have also an amplification that happens there. And, okay, so if this sounds, you know, like, is this a new science? This is an old science. It's actually a really old stuff. And there is authors like John Michael, who in this book, Sacred Geometry, Ancient Science, and then Heavenly Order of Earth, he describes this very principle of atmospheric electricity or the Schumann harmonics and how this was actually used throughout the ancient world for creating designs of temples and structures. So I'm just going to read this to you. There is two forms of natural energy were involved. One terrestrial, the other one from the atmosphere. Through the ritual fusion of these two elements, a spirit was generated and spread like an enchantment from the temple, bearing fertility to the surrounding countryside, and pervading it with an atmosphere of peace and happiness. In terms of spiritual technology, maybe I have involved the fertilization of the earth spirit by positively charged energy channeled through the lighting rods from the temple roof. In the Old Testament chronicles tell of life-giving streams that rose beneath the temple and flowed toward the four corners of the earth. So this is why we term this idea of regenerative architecture. When structures are designed from the realization of the intrinsic energetic aspects that exist throughout the whole of nature, we will naturally re-enter into a regenerative symbiotic relationship with our environment, thus revealing the ultimate purpose of bioarchitecture. So we're talking about regenerative technology, how we can regenerate our bodies and live healthy lives, but also how we can regenerate our environment and create life-affirming field effects that will reverberate through the entire landscape of our communities, our towns, our spaces, and it will also go back to nature. It will help nature to also, we give back to nature by creating structures and buildings that operate and work with these kind of principles. So, thank you very much. That was the end.
Hey, Yeah, and the two domes that we're working on right now are behind here. We have 6 more to go, and it's not open to the public right now. But if you'd like, you can go on a quick tour with us to walk through one of the buildings. And so Juan and I will just wait out front for 5 minutes, and then a small group can do a quick walkthrough. Okay, thank you so much.